Hello students, welcome to the channel. We have been working on the reading section of the October 16, 2019 PSAT, and so far I have uploaded 3 videos on this section: the literature, the social science, and the first science passage. Today we look at the 4th passage of this test, the history passage. So let's begin. Passage 1 is adapted from Anonymous, letter to Horace Greeley at the New York Daily Tribune on the National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester, Massachusetts. Originally published in 1850, Passage 2 is adapted from Horace Greeley, Remarks to A, originally published in 1850. So this seems to be a correspondence between two people, one whose name is not revealed, and the second, Horace Greeley, and this pertains to the Women's Rights Convention in Massachusetts. So let's begin with the first passage. It is clear that if we are going to live or have any private comforts, there must be dinners cooked, children's faces must be washed, and there must be a home to which the mind of the weary husband will turn to bear him up and urge him on in his toils for the inmates of that sanctuary, a home where he can for a time forget in his wife's and children's society the toils and troubles of this weary world, a home which he can never leave without carrying with him a new grace, a new strength drawn from women's influence to enable him victoriously and manfully to withstand the trials and temptations of the world. Now, if women are given the right to vote, to electioneer, to become stateswomen, why it is an incontrovertible fact, that is, if they attend properly to politics, that the dinners must go uncooked, the children's faces unwashed, and home be forgotten, unless indeed the men exchange duties with them, as was proposed at the convention, and stay at home and help their wives cook and wash the dishes. So the first paragraph kind of relates, or rather, it kind of provides some sort of understanding of what the right to vote would bring, uh, as per the author's perspective, right? So if the women were allowed to vote, the author says, and we don't know the name of the author, then the duties that women perform at home are duties which go beyond just providing for the family, cooking dinners, which also kind of go into the realm of providing a home for the weary husband. Those duties will not be fulfilled unless men start to play a part in them. And it seems that the person who's written this would say that there is some sort of tension between running a successful home, running a home where everyone feels loved and everyone feels protected, and going out into the public sphere and joining politics or taking part in debates, right? So this first paragraph introduces that tension which the right to vote would bring into the household. So far from thinking women slaves, I do not see how it can appear in such a light to any thinking mind, any true-hearted woman. There is something so superior about women that would make one shrink as from profanation at the idea of her mingling in public with the sterner and worser sex, a spiritualization that raises her far above the intrigues of politicians and the vulgarity of rowdies, a superiority which, if not acknowledged in words, is confessed in actions, even by men who, however degraded they may be, refrain from the slightest word or action that could be commented upon in the presence of a woman. So this is the second argument, right? The first argument is how the right to vote might uh, destabilize the home. And the second argument is how it would introduce women into a realm which is not fit for women, as per the author, right? So the author puts the women in a superior position, in a position of spiritual, um, let's say that the author calls women spiritually better, spiritually higher than man, right? And he says, or she says, the author says that it would be a degradation of women to come down to the level of politics, to go out in society and work politics and deal with the kind of things that only men, and here men um, deal with. The idea that men deal with those is not presented as something which reflects well on men. It shows that women need to be protected from that, because women are purer, they are spiritually at a higher position. The women of the Worcester Convention seem to have entirely overlooked the immense power given to women in the form of home influence. What power can be greater than a mother's holy and elevated example? So here the author kind of, summarizes the two arguments by saying that the best influence that a woman can wield is at home. What greater power can a woman wield than as a mother and as a wife? So why ask women to go out and become a politician or be a part of politics? We must also remember that if women gained these absurd rights, they would be obliged to maintain them, and this they have not the strength to do. For which of the women at the Worcester Convention could knock a man down if he chose to stand up? And what man would come forward to protect a woman as long as she claimed to herself the right of self-protection? So here the author is saying that women do not have the strength to fight men, right? Um, so I think here strength is not referred to in the physical sense, but in the sense of debating and arguing and trying to win an argument, right? So because the author says they do not have the strength to do, for which of the women at the Worcester Convention could knock a man down if he chose to stand up? So I don't think this standing up refers to a physical knocking down, right? The standing up refers to debate, an argument. And what man put forward to protect a woman as long as she claimed to herself the right of self-protection? And this also kind of presents women in the light of needing to be protected by others. And that would not happen if women said that they could do it themselves. Okay, so let's first try and answer the questions pertaining to passage one. One of the main ideas of passage one is that children will suffer unduly if their mothers work outside the home. Women, in fact, possess greater political power than men. Home life would be harmed if women were allowed to exercise political authority. Involvement in politics is equally challenging for men and women. So you can immediately eliminate options B and D, because nowhere in the passage is the first author arguing that women have greater political power or that involvement in politics is equally challenging. In fact, the second paragraph, the author suggests that involvement in politics could be more challenging for women than for men. Now, between A and C, C is the better answer. I think A kind of puts it in a way that is not supported by the passage. It's kind of an extreme option. I don't think the author says that children will suffer. I think what the author is trying to say that home life in general would be affected, right? If women were to get the right to vote. So C puts it better. C puts it better in context, in a fashion which is not exaggerated. So I go with C for this. As used in line 1, clear most nearly means. So it is clear that if we are going to live or have any private comforts, there must be dinner's good. So it is clear, it is obvious, it is quite apparent. So it is obvious, right? We have obvious here. So whenever you have a vocabulary in context word, before you come to the options, think of a good word that you might want to use in place of the word asked, right? So, and then see the best synonym for the word that you thought, right? So here, when we are saying it is clear that dinners need to be cooked, it's kind of saying that this is obvious, right? If you need to run a home, you need to have certain comforts. Okay. What main effect do the words weary, toils, and troubles used in lines 4 to 8 have on the tone of the first paragraph of passage 1? So you know that the author refers to the husband's affairs outside the home when they talk about all of these words like weary and toil. So if I see it here, a home to which the mind of the weary husband will turn to bear him up and urge him on in his toils for the inmates of that sanctuary. So part of the reason the husband works so hard and provides for the family is this sense of comfort that the husband derives at home. So what is the effect of these words? They create a somber tone that reinforces the importance of the home as a retreat from the outside world. They create a sinister tone that suggests the danger of privileging the needs of children over those of adults. They create an aggravated tone that conveys irritation with the stresses of marriage. They create a discontented tone that underscores the hopelessness of domestic life. So here the answer is very clearly A. The idea of presenting the home as a sort of retreat, as a sort of haven from the outside world, that's what the first paragraph does, right? It says that the man returns to the home and finds in it a place of peace against the toils of the outside world, right? So this is a somber, a serious tone that reinforces the idea of the home as a retreat. Okay, option B is not correct because one, there is nothing sinister about those words, right? Those words are meant to convey the the fact of the man's hard work outside the home and the fact of the home being a place of calm and comfort, right? So there's nothing sinister. So B is wrong. Aggravated tone is kind of to bring the reader's attention to something which is grim, something which is desperate, something which needs attention. And it's not about the stresses of marriage, right? It's about the home being a retreat. So C is wrong. And it's not a discontented tone about the hopelessness of domestic life. Rather, it's to kind of argue that let the home remain a retreat. Let women not get the right to vote because then the home will cease to be the retreat that it is. Okay, now we have passage 2 questions. So let's read. Horace Greeley. That the full and equal enjoyment of political franchises would improve the lot of women may be doubtful, but we are willing to give the democratic theory a full and fair trial. Whenever so many women shall petition for the right of suffrage as to indicate that a majority of the sex virtually concur in the demand, then we shall insist that the franchise be extended to them. Being a disciple of the faith which holds that all just government is founded on the consent of the governed, we could do not less, even though we knew that the women would make a bad use of the power thus according them. Right first, expediency afterward. Okay, so we know that Horace was answering to the anonymous letter that the first passage is about. And she starts on with a note of uncertainty. So she is not somebody who is asking for women's rights or women's right to vote without any doubt. She's not somebody who is saying that she absolutely supports the idea of suffrage for women. She's conceding that there could be problems with giving women the right to vote, but she still supports it because she believes in the fundamental principle that a government should be run with the consent of the governed. And since half the population is women, those women should have a say in how they are governed, right? So, so she's kind of saying that it's possible this movement, this process may not work or may not yield the desired outcomes, but we still have to try it. As to our correspondents' fear that buttered toast will run short and children's faces get crusted over, in case the political rights of women are recognized as equal to and identical with those of men, we do not share it. We know people who suppose that when slavery was abolished, there could be no more boots blacked, no wood chopped, bacon fried, etc. But we see that all needful operations go on, though slavery is abolished throughout this region. We see not why it may not so be the case, not be so in the case the slavery of women should in like manner be abolished. Okay, so here she addresses the primary point, the point in the first paragraph of the first passage, that if women were to take on a political role, then home life would be ruined. Basic things like dinners will, like providing dinners and taking care of children, those basic things will not be taken care of. And the reply that Horace gives to that is that the same kind of arguments were made when slavery was abolished, that a lot of things that slaves did would no longer be done, and that didn't happen. So why confine women to a role that they want to get out of, right? It is inappropriate, and that things will continue to go as they have always worked. Political franchises are but means to an end, which end is the securing of social and personal rights. Other classes have found the elective franchise serviceable towards the attainment of these rights, and we see not why it would lose its efficacy in the hands of women. And as to the exposure of women to insult and outrage in the town or ward meeting or at the election, we trust the effect would be just opposite to that anticipated, namely, that men would be constrained by the presence of ladies to keep sober and behave themselves. The presence of women has this effect ever in those public assemblages honored by her presence, and we trust its virtue is far from having been exhausted. So this is kind of a rejoinder to the second point raised by Anonymous, that women are too gentle, too spiritually elevated to be part of the the dirt of politics. And Horace says that instead of women facing that dirt, it could happen that men would restrain themselves in the presence of women, and politics overall would get cleaner, right? So so these two paragraphs, the one before this and this one, answer to the first author. As to women having to fight and knock down to maintain their rights, if once conceded, we don't believe a word of it. Knock down whom? Certainly not those who cheerfully concede them all they ask. And if there are any of the other sort, such brutes as choose to commence the game of knocking down, they would be very sure to get enough of it before coming to the women. So this answers the last point of the first passage, that women would be knocked down. And as I said, I think that knocked down in this sense is metaphorical, not literal, whereas to say that how will women protect themselves in a field governed largely by men, controlled largely by men. And Horace says that the idea of knocking down would not come to fruition because the voter would be happy, would be satisfied with what a woman candidate would do. So the idea of protest, the idea of knocking down, as it were, the woman candidate would not come. And if it did, there would be enough opposition to that behavior before those knocks could reach the woman candidate, right? So this is like a very straightforward answer to the first passage, point-wise rebuttal to the first passage. Okay, in passage 2, Greeley indicates that women must be given the right to vote when the majority of women demand it because women have been granted that right by the courts. Granting that right is consistent with the idea of a government based on democratic principles. Men have done a poor job of electing able officials without women's participation. The United States is out of step with other great nations in which women can vote. So here the answer is very clearly B. The first paragraph really very clearly says that the idea of granting the vote to women is based on the idea that a government should govern with the consent of the governed, right? So the granting the right to vote is consistent with the idea of a government based on democratic principles, option B. Okay, question 34. Which statement can reasonably be inferred from passage 2 about Greeley's position on women's right to vote? Although Greeley suspects he will be ostracized. Oh, Greeley is a man. Okay, sorry. Horace, yeah. Horace Greeley. Right. Although Greeley suspects he will be ostracized for supporting women's suffrage, he's willing to incur the risk. Although Greeley assumes that women, once granted the vote, will lose interest in politics, he considers it unfair to treat them as second-class citizens. Although Greeley has reservations about women properly exercising their right to vote, he feels that women are entitled to that right. Although Greeley is personally opposed to women's involvement in activities outside the home, he is sympathetic to women's desire to engage in politics. Okay, so this is a good question, and you can eliminate A and B directly because I don't think he suspects he'll be ostracized. It's not about what he fears for himself. So A is out. And there's definitely no mention of women losing interest in politics. So B is out. Now, I don't think he has reservations about women exercising the right to vote, right? Um, is he personally opposed to women's involvement? If you read these lines again, being a disciple of the faith, we could do not less, even though we knew that women would make a bad use of the power thus accorded them. So he does say that women uh, would make a bad use of the power accorded them. Okay, is this evidence? Yeah, it is evidence. So let's work with the line numbers. So I have to go to 34. Wait, I'll just write 34 and 35. So 55 to 59, 59 to 60, 61 to 65, and 70 to 71. Okay. So 55 to 59 is being a disciple of the faith, which holds that we could do not less, even though we knew that the women would make a bad use of the power thus accorded them. Yeah, so that is the best answer, but I'm trying to see if it goes with C and D. I think C is better because when he says that women would make a bad use of the power thus accorded them, he's talking about the power to vote. So he has reservations about women exercising their power properly, but he still thinks they are entitled to their right. I don't think he's personally opposed to women's involvement in activities, because when he says we, he's talking about the general apprehension that men might have regarding women's right to vote. So yeah, so I'll go with C for 34, and I'll go with A for 35. Yeah. Okay. Based on passage 2, Greeley would most likely view the concerns about women's neglect of household duties as amusing because they suggest an inability to conceive of men undertaking such duties, pervasive because many people have publicly expressed such concerns, troubling because they hint at larger fears that are not so easily overcome, exaggerated because past concerns of a similar nature have proved to be overblown. So I think D is the best answer, because the fact that women will neglect household duties, he compares that to fears after slavery was abolished about things like boots getting polished, not getting done. Those things, nobody to do those things, but things just went along as they always had, right? So yeah, so he thinks those are exaggerated because as the past events show, those concerns, they don't run the course of time. So I'll go with D for this. The author of passage 1 would most likely concede that Greeley's claim regarding women's potential exposure to insult and outrage is somewhat plausible, since men rarely consider the needs of anyone but themselves. Mostly correct, since men's pride usually ensures chivalrous behavior. Generally true, since men's behavior would be tempered by women's virtuousness. Largely accurate, since most men would be likely to ignore the threat of public censure. So I think the first author would be sort of sympathetic to the idea, because they do say that there is something so superior about women that they would make one shrink as from profanation at the idea of a mingling in public with the sterner and worser sex. a superiority which, if not acknowledged in words, is confessed in actions, even by men who, however degraded they may be, refrain from the slightest word or action that could be commented upon in the presence of a woman. So somewhat plausible, option A. But the reason for the given in A doesn't make sense, right? So because the idea that men consider the needs only of themselves wouldn't fit the idea of them kind of refraining from any sort of abuse or profanity. Mostly correct, since men's pride usually ensures chivalrous behavior. Generally true, since men's behavior would be tempered by women's virtuousness. Largely accurate, since most men would likely to ignore the... So A and D are definitely out. It's between B and C. I'm just going to read those lines again. I think it's between line 30 and 34. So 24 to 34. Yeah, 24 to 34. There is something so superior about women. Yeah, so I think it's a focus on the virtuousness of women, right? It's not about men's chivalry, that's not brought about. It's about women's virtuousness and how that tempers men's behavior. So between B and C, I think C is better for 37, and B obviously is the answer for 38, lines 24 to 34. That's it, right? Yeah. Okay, so that was the history passage. It started from question 30. So let's create this. Okay, 30 is here. C, D, A, B, C, C, D, A, B, C, 35, A, D, C, B, A, D, C, B. Okay, so that was the history passage of the October 2019 PSAT. We have one more passage to go before we complete the section. I'll be uploading more such reading walkthroughs, so come back later to check them out. See you in a new video soon. Take care. Bye.